Hello, YouTube and Judge Napolitano and all the online judges, especially too the one who brought up all the lies with you know Mr. President Kennedy, President slash Chief Kennedy's. Know how President slash Chief, those are three incompatible volumes, but one way, and where and how they are actually bound as that hyper native, unabridged Constitution, as a human volume science, as it is actually manifest individuals grouped and species body. Only, see, it's really the species body of individuals, because the strength of the group, if it's leaving out the finite, it's not, it's ways to discern. It's not, it's systems, not evolutions. It's not sciences. See, we have theory simultaneously in defense of itself, formally and informally, with the opinions of people A through Z at every location the human volume is. That's recorded, self-valued, and other pretended simultaneously, and or they attach you to fake words, fake locations. How they get away with this, here and there, everywhere the species volume is, it employed, only allowed to be victim predators slash victim hyper victim predators. Where and how, for example, colonization's identity, it is an increasing value to all kinds of answers as an extension into them that is increasing value with those questions in those topics, and the answers have that inseparable from themselves. There is an identity of relativity slash hyper relativity. For example, this is also leading up to the World Trade Center attack, 9/11 in Manhattan, and in the Ninth Circuit Court next to it. Roles with uses, remote conscious uses by agencies, directors, and things like that, where and how we can show them having been used remotely as victim predators slash victim hyper predators, where and how this breaching method knew that everyone would have to, not knowing how to properly any longer, even though the means are capable from the youngest ages, to counter syntactically the real causes and uses of criminal insidiousness natures of positive treatments and of negative treatments, which are simultaneously identity treatments regarding instances, and roles with that, again, two simultaneously needing to pretend other, where and how it most counts. So all along roads and routes, this is conscious exploitation since before our founders were born. The breaching method set up how the suburbs roads, how the cities were going to unfold. Common sense, they knew they had infrastructure, how they could build. They measure and maintain our own and others individually grouped in together as the identities of countries A through Z as victim predators slash victim hyper predators, having had to replace each age of correlation nature at each location. What our founders here and there really left us like this to say through and to have revealed. But we haven't had this revealed because this method knew that they had to hide their actual, they had to hide from their roles, entertaining the quality of fact, the qualities of fact treatment nature, that the breaching method at countries A through Z forced with criminal foreign influences, specifically knowing that people would have to counter syntactically things like criminal insidiousness, things like wrongdoers, syntactically manifest at locations relevant to where and how only an individual could. And if you separate individuals means to have the use the order, the slightest detail denied, for example, is proofs that we're not going by evolution science. We're not going by actual science. See, it's proofs that theory is being used with delusions, but also with criminally foreign influence, fact treatment nature qualities and aspects, premises treatments, A therefore B treatments. For example, Boolean logic. They left out the Trinity. They left out psychology, psychiatry. Roles with them at locations. Increasingly, identity theft, frauds, slander, certain type of victim predator, for example, and the people that run the prisons. Exception nature tied to the interbranch as locations, identities, names were handed originally and still. Stewardships needs to create wealth in while as value nature systems increasingly no longer that hyper syntactically inseparably and increasingly conjunctive to our syntax nature, how it was and is really manifest. And this requires understanding uses of identity, its identity in relationship to itself and the value of that. So since before, countries A through Z have had like countries that fight with each other, especially where they bleed with those fighting, or all exception nature do, because they've been using exception nature other than how the identity that is actually hyper simultaneous, a distinct identity of sequence / simultaneous nature, where and how space / existence is three distinct temporary / lasting occurrences. And the value of that, again, tactical ulterior from value of the treatments. For example, here in physics, where the syntax of the leadership of the people who explain how languages work, let alone our own formal languages at each country. Each physical culture, like for example, even within cultures, any location that has roles with the preservation of the things that are hyper evidentially archaeological evidences, they have from off their location uses of increasing impositions and motivations relative to and as those of a breaching method, but relative to and as where and how it actually was and is through our nation's manifest. So three things are simultaneous, or they have to be treated wrong. And this is simultaneously relevant to where and how. For example, I didn't say it, but I'm saying, because I have to, in other words, people will jump in if someone tries to use experience honestly regarding what is actually recorded from off all locations, insidious positive and negative treatments at each age of fact treatment nature. all locations. It was his increasingly collusion / S at all formal where where sciences are manifest. Now this breaching method. So, for example, we have roles with Korea and with Russia and with Saudi Arabia, with people on off the state judicial branch offices, and along Route 3, involved with Central Connecticut State University in New Britain, and with other campuses, and with locations next to them, like next to Trinity College in Hartford, are involved with uses simultaneously, consciously, of how since before there was the Korean War, before semi-ancient nations, there was already a breaching method. In other words, there was already something that tactically took humanity from the syntax explanations of why and how actually we are a species volume, individuals, and grouped. Those are three distinct identities of positive. They are positive to themselves simultaneously, but then further, only as criminal insidiousness natures of positive treatments, if not two other identities of sequence / simultaneous nature further, which is part of everything in demonstration of the identity of hyper-simultaneous, its identity of relationship to itself, and the only increasing value of that as the extent of its complete possession over all parts of space / existence, to the extent we know is true always, not denying any exceptions. And using also as evidence that which is hyper-evidential, where and how people use physical evidences and uses, anywhere there are positive and negative treatments, there are identity treatments. So, for example, it had been employed. So when I use the names of how, in other words, before Russia and America were formally united to the extent we are, it was already by a method that knew the value of that and the value of how we are individually grouped and together, even the identity of how grouped individual countries with other countries, all different kind of ways. Everything's about the invisible but still discernible, because simultaneously it's about the hyper invisible but still discernible. People don't realize, many people don't realize, not by accident, that and how the spring is a little window, only a little window to plant seeds, to plant the things that will cause really positive value nature progressions, acts, and natures. One of the positions associated with the moving counter positions that are to come with the ancient gaming system and other projects that we could use, including pantheism, to fund what formally will not be funded for us, privately, and stuff like that. In other words, we have to force this because it was employed. How the non-bonds, in other words, for example, our species volume is bound by that which really revealed us, that which we know is true always, not denying any exceptions. Again, that is critical, because it uses exception nature distinctly from ourselves, but also non-distinctly from ourselves. And its identity of relationship is inseparable from all parts of itself. So this is a decipher of why and of how. different languages that use the letters that English uses. And with English's alphabet, this has to do with where and to how and why. On the website of Yale, for example, there's a picture of Jesus Christ, and he's got a halo lit up behind his head, and has A on the left side of his head, and W on the right side of his head. I don't know how. It's a phenomenon. How my initials are AW, and I figured this out first. A through W are bound, individually grouped and together, distinctly, non-distinctly, and simultaneously, even though their grouping is an identity of relationship to the identity of hyper invisible, but still discernible, but only to an extent. And the further extent of it can only be brought to our use through the use of contemplation, a method of contemplation that requires uses of scientific words like prayer. So, but this method employed prayer to mean other than it was supposed to mean. All exceptions, the exception nature, are a demonstration of the same thing, per how it uses all identity ground locations. So the messengers of religions had to put their religious books in a form that would be able to preserve our means to show how the stewards of all identity ground locations, including the ones defending books, and their substance and the value of it. See, the identity of the hypersimultaneous is an identity of relationship to itself, and only increasing value of that as perfect memory. For example, as is demonstrated by the value of what really was sequenced true, was true, and the value of truth, where it is applied to subjects' treatments. The identity the sciences share are simultaneously relevant / hyper relevant to simultaneously what was manifest actually as colonization, for example, or roles simultaneously with predicate acts and with wrongdoing, predicate acts / wrongdoing, as nature, as criminal insidiousness, as syntax, positive and negative treatments that couldn't defend themselves and afford others or themselves, proper syntactical defenses of ourselves as and of everyone around us in nature as it is actually syntactically manifest. So this breaching method, consciously maintained and exploited, uses at each age of campus. There's a phenomenon tied to, in 2006, it was proven in the World Trade Center attack context, or right before it, right before the World Trade Center attack context in Manhattan. There is an appeals court in a Ninth Circuit Court in Manhattan. And from inside the court, someone had post-dated documents to make them appear late to the Ninth Circuit Court. And so they ruled that the things had been filed late. But it was proven after the World Trade Center attack that they had been filed on time, and someone had post-dated them from inside the court. That proven led to a 2006 district court part of a case /S that was ongoing at the time of my father's death. And my father was the It was a union case, and my father was a pro se um, plaintiff in the case, and former director of the FBI is a co-defendant with three co-defendants and a lawyer who also had roles and have roles with timed criminally foreign influence uses of databases at campuses I went to and uses of kids. Now, this is where people would say, oh, you know, people want, oh, we'll leave courts to decide, but they had roles with this. This is also weird in how our relationships with Korea, like where people are told not to speak about things and they don't, that is employed where they're going to have to leave out the uses of that. They're going to have to self-value roles with uses of that. So there's a Joe DeMoro from Rocky Hill, and there's one from Wethersfield, who are involved also, for example, with a Mr. Johnson. I never had a verbal conversation with. He was recorded, confessed, demonstrated, non-verbally confirmed roles with predicate acts / wrongdoing in databases, where and how they've been coordinating on and off campuses, roles with identity theft, frauds, instances, and natures of identity thefts. Also relevant to where and how I actually recorded our conscious uses and employments of reactions to where and how, sickly distinctly, the differences and difference itself was measured and maintained by the breaching method, taught and told other and self-valued other than how syntactically we are manifest, possession by that which is simultaneous actually recorded. See, then now we have a hyper possession that is not itself. It is not only invisible, but still discernible. But is also hyper invisible, still discernible as an identity, as criminal insidiousness. Where and how slavery was manifest per this breaching method's uses of it, sickly distinctly, each difference. To keep Earth's a special difference. See, math, so the math teaches about what is variable or coefficient, abridged, self-value, this having been abridged, per victim reactions, per hyper victim reactions that have been employed by the breaching method at all formal locations, because it already employed it at all locations. And then it knew that would go into other natures of private and overt criminal enterprises and uses of insidiousness A through Z, people A through Z, that they could employ, kept needing to hide the same sequence shifts, identity thefts and frauds, relevant to and as roles with the identity theft / fraud / slander method. There's also conscious uses of where and how relativity is actually manifest. This is better than computers work, better than how computer calculators work distinctly. And then how they work distinctly, non distinctly, and simultaneously further. They are hype additional. You see, but we have the simplicity of how this works, obfuscated, and so they'll get experts from every science used to maintain time and quality treatments that are increasingly reliant upon, for example, the sciences having been abridged, having been obfuscated from their shared identities, demonstrations of its means to answer our questions, how they were prevented free speech and how they are prevented free speech now, and other was pretended simultaneously. how they got away with preventing any voice from telling about that, or they steal their voice, attach them the fake words, attach them the fake words with themselves, everyone around it. How they got away with that can't leave out how individually grouped and together the three branches of government as they were actually manifest. And that exception nature, exceptions that use their identity, like prisons tied to them, military tied to them, databases stewards, you know, roles with the opinions of A through Z people regarding the significance and the value of for example, names treatment. So there are people that exploited that and how three ways, both how our countries before they were united again, now through a breaching method, again tactical ulterior from how we were actually individually grouped and together, and tied to positive and negative treatment, tied to identity treatment, where and how we are syntactically manifest by the complete possession of that which is actually hyper simultaneous, that's which we are forbid free speech. So, for example, Little Rap Guy and Friends cartoons are counter obfuscated, but now I explained partially why. For example, so the roles with the countries as they are told to you through the news. The news has demonstrated, like on off Central Connecticut State University, they have roles with people associated with and as the former director of the FBI, Robert Luskin, and co-defendants of his. Recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed how used remotely as victim predators since they were kids. Relevant to where and how also in Korea and in Russia and in Saudi Arabia, kids are exploited in elderly homes and medical locations, increasingly criminally foreign influence through the mental health community that is also with badges, that is also with the military, that is also increasingly with people A through Z and all exceptions as exception in nature tied to the interbranch and the locations, because then everyone goes back to the home. Everyone speaks through others. There are qualities and aspects of that were engineered to hide actually what happened with instances and the relevance of the value of what came first really at all former locations. What really was the causes of it? When they say it's about money, they leave out how it is really about pseudoscience. In other words, the whole volume would have provided better than free means for our elderly. They have sickly, distinctly extorted, worse than extorted. People A through Z have nothing to do with those locations. And the people at the locations, like the nurses, like the doctors, and like the owners of the places. Now they extended that per reasons we have to examine how sustained was that method against Native Americans A through Z, and then further hyper additionally to this against the colonists A through Z, and then further hyper additionally to this how against them distinctly, non-distinctly further. And this whole way, then you start seeing the logic of that non-distinctly as a predicate acts delivery system method / criminal insidiousness nature delivery system method, and that relevant to where and how syntactically everyone was simultaneously engineered to need to pretend other, to blame other things, others, or selves, even when correctly, the two. So all arrays only going to be recorded are in collusion, illusions, collusions, delusions, collusions. There are tactical, physical, metaphysical and identity delusions that are self-valued have been self-valued regarding uses of words like politics. For example, where even when they blame things on the correct things, why, how, formal identities of jobs, and people have to do jobs and react to the real causes of negative value, nature progressions, acts, and natures as roles in the furtherance of it, not just the same way, but being used by the same means. So this uses all. So Korea and people from Korea, Russia, and Saudi Arabia were confirmed roles with this, and not realizing it, and because there were forced roles to this. And this is when we have no side to represent ourselves. This is where and how we can answer and what is actually recorded, how it is being and haven't been employed, where and how we have no representation, others are pretended, and how they get away with that simultaneously. See, those three things are relevant because the extent of the simultaneously we know is true always, not denying exceptions together. Its identity of relationship to itself, we know, increasingly ulterior from that which is native pure, our actual means by the recorded tactically denatured identity of the grounds, identity of relationship to itself, and means as that better than perfect system only increasingly as the only identity of power and of might that could simultaneously be the order of the finite, positive to the smallest delicate detail thing. Boxing. So this is the narrative behind our gaming system. A legion was first revealed as a hyper additional to the human volume science to enable humanity to be what it could not be, but one way, /s. So it was an extension consciously of and as the countries before the sciences became criminally foreign influence, before the campus martius, which is grouped value, became tactically ulterior from enabling the hyperconjunction between the species body of volumes might, as is manifest as groups might, over individual, to manifest the individual, its means to defend finite. One little finite detail denied. In other words, we're not going by the species body system that is positive to itself. There's criminal insidiousness natures of positive negative treatments there. That's simultaneous identity treatments. So whenever you hear people, so in other words, so they have the kids of the overt criminal enterprises, the private ones, and of the interbranch, making use of people insidiousness A through Z because uses of locations. And for example, then like with Local 230 in Hartford, Connecticut, is involved with former director of the FBI with a whole bunch of different natures of federal criminals before they got caught, as timed roles with instances where and how the sciences stewards as victims / hyper victims are defending their treatments of and uses of people's names, where and how that's also being changed for them. So we use each other's names with positive and negative treatments that are not accurate. Hello. Ron. I have to look that, but I don't know what that means, Ron. How you doing? So this is, again, before the World Trade Center attack, in the context of the inside the World Trade Center, inside the Ninth Circuit Court next to it. I'm not Dr. Ron. There are proofs that, that I might have been, but there are people also leading up into intercities, intercampuses, who have had roles with uses simultaneously of the non-employments. I mean, of the non-conjunctions between our countries like Korea, Laos, Russia, peacefully, where we are unity. That unity and the disunity and the that both of them were and are employed. They have been employed also at 1/3/5 identity ground locations manifest, where and how that was also sustained. There were also sustained uses of it, further in an ordered way, manifest 1/3/5. I mean, 5/15. Well, in other words, the same way computers work. They have roles with uses of criminally foreign influence, positive and negative treatments at each age and nature of campus, of database relationship. Simultaneously, there were fit to collusions needing to hide uses of that, pretend not to realize everyone's also forced, tricked, or persuaded to roles with this from off all locations. And see, that was sustained. So to observe this, we have to understand the increasing value of how sickly distinctly every colonist, everywhere the species volume is, was a victim, individually grouped and together, specifically to make defenses of it, forced, tricked, hurt, persuaded, worse, only capable and only allowed to be collusions with illusions as arrays, used where evidence is, where that which is hyper evidential has prevented its voice. So hundreds of millions of Americans and millions of people from other countries, when we see and hear positive and negative treatments insidious, it is once we're already older. And when you use the revelations that demonstrate and that come from observation of how sickly distinctly every colonist also has how hyper-additionally as Native Americans, how that was being and had been employed effectively. The only way they allow them to get certain coverage and certain kinds of reliefs from the damage of that increasingly is by uses of evidences, treatments, archaeological evidences, treatments, and standards that are criminally foreign influence. Where and how being and having been employed, each age of campus, each member and role being there is being and having been employed per what new. It would have to increasingly self-value roles, increasingly at all other locations, needing to be able to, not care, blame other things, others, ourselves, insidiousness with people who make statements that are used, recorded effectively, used by courts and by police forms and by, political families and by overt criminal enterprises and private ones, and in seriousness of people A through Z against every individual voice relative to this. Because in other words, so they employed the breaching method, employed how identities of countries would pretend they could speak for the identity of the human volume. So therefore, for the country anyway. So that's what they can't, because they can't speak for the Constitution unabridged, because it is so many ways abridged. And offensively, we are prevented free speech. So what did this? It employed all, the hierarchy, what people aren't allowed to speak about, and what they are allowed to speak about, to be used to hide the lie progressions of that which really is the cause of distinct nature, all the distinct natures of bad things, the real causes of negative value nature progressions, acts, and nature. For example, for sequence shifts, values, where and how recorded, being, and having has been employed. Central Connecticut State University in New Britain has had since before everyone was born, and through our lifetimes, roles with a predicate acts delivery system method singular, but it is increasingly having roles with predicate acts and with wrongdoing simultaneously, differentially, especially critically, because relative to where and how criminal insidiousness and the identity of the ground, a conjunction with where and how the identity of that which is actually hyper simultaneously recorded is actually manifest. So the people in the huge buildings in the cartoon value nature system version of New York that are extorted. By the way, we know people A through Z are extorted as the human volume system on all identity ground locations, being and having been tactically denatured. The nature system, hypernative pure, uses means that we are prevented, our actual means, not and all excuses for it are really in demonstration of the same thing if we examine this. But we have not been allowed to demonstrate how the overt criminal enterprises, private ones, and how foreign and domestic militaries and identities were shared intercampuses of each age and nature, involved with the breaching method also that consciously uses and used on and off the state judicial branches and on and off the state prison offices, collusions with with victims. But if you refer to them as victims, they won't give you the quality of fact treatment nature, because it was also used as victim predators. And to deny this, to pretend it was for those reasons only known, when and how they have teachers that don't even know other kids being lied to multi-front with teachers of kids being lied to behind their backs about themselves and about their family members, attaching kids and their family members to fake words about legal cases relevant to this. They were planting evidences on and off campuses timed. Control each mind. So it's nothing personal against Saudi Arabia, which is preserving same time, that which is inseparable from English, which is inseparable from all the other languages. Like yin yang is preserving this. That the archaeological evidences / hyper evidential evidences of the ancients having had better understanding of the electrical engineering of our species, how it is really manifest the value of our identity of the ground, identity of relationship to itself, and the value of that. And this being where and how we are syntactically manifest, the alphabet is better than a living identity of volume / hypervolume. that is only increasing value. All exceptions, exception nature that appear to be in demonstration or other demonstrate the same thing. Because these sounds have a better than identity of, they have an identity of relationship to with themselves, ourselves, to the extent we know is true always. For the same reason, the species volume, the species body of volume, is a whole bunch of individual, distinct volumes. The identity of the hyper simultaneous has a distinct, non-distinct, and simultaneous relationship to all things that is further positive or negative to itself. To again relevant where and how we have overt / insidious examples like slavery, that and in the value progression that doesn't leave out the hyper additional already having been extended non-distinct method against the Native Americans that was also sickly distinctly against and is sickly distinctly against everyone, every difference, because they're positive and negative treatments. I'm not just saying open. It's not just who's with no forgiveness or forgiveness. Those were both employed who would be where and how it knew a bunch of victim predators would have to counter as fact treatment nature the real causes of overt criminal enterprises and of private ones at all locations with criminal insidiousness. That was in collusion and is in collusion with people's opinions and qualities of fact treatment nature A through Z per this method that separated the actual answers to measure and have our own measure and maintain, because it showed everyone how to hide it per its needs to hide what it developed all identities of industries reliant upon. For example, the needs to deny exceptions, deny awareness of how really America was forced to value businesses that couldn't defend themselves and not self-value simultaneously criminally foreign influence readings of statutes and of uses of the opinions of A through Z at people at all locations to hide that. This breaching method employed that. It employed things off the records first and sustained that without anyone realizing, because it knew it was going to cause negative value nature progressions, action natures. It maintains this specifically to hide what came before that, to keep what came before that self-value, blame the other things others ourselves, to keep time treatments used simultaneously, too fast, too slow to get over on forever nature, which is one of the things we are constantly, non-distinctly. And what is variably, see, that which is hyper simultaneous has Earth's a special difference, keeping the value of what is variable, what it is variably. One of the things it is always is a forever nature, the identity of the hyper simultaneous per science. And exceptions where we are temporary nature, it is in demonstration that it is a temporary / lasting identity of relationship to itself that is making more of itself that which generated matter in the first place, which requires use as a scientific value, the hyper simultaneous, and names additional to it, because that's part of how it shows how it uses exceptions and exception nature distinctly from ourselves or any machine we could invent, so we could get the real answers. So we know that there were remote uses of the defenses of their identities individually grouped and together at a certain kind of victim child abuse used to counter all the real causes of negative attitude progressions, acts, and natures, and uses of criminal insidiousness with those, they grouped private criminal enterprises and overt ones wrongly, purposely, because they have crime methods together on and off campuses and between them. Now, these are also the same names that are involved intercities, having been planting evidence of sequence shifts, wire crimes, mail crime illusions. So they have even employed certain type of victim predator / hyper victim predator, people that would, of the intelligence community, that would do what we all would without realizing it. But per I caught this per phenomenal, we could all observe, but you guys have to follow mandated law. When someone says that Interbranch Connecticut switches and forges names, this and they pretend it simultaneously, they pretend it's personal. And when I say that, knowingly, so we have defenses of integrity. See, real justice must satisfy all appearances of real justice. As I was taught, Marbury versus Madison means. See, they can't stand for real justice as the individuals, as they really speak and spoke for, and as uses of the identities of branches, including exception nature tied to them. The guy at the store, the neighbor of an interbranch, tells them something, and they use that as part of their judgment, especially where and how that was needed, and how it could be anticipated is how they're stacking things in the databases and making uses of it by the people next to those schools. They have a certain type of victims predator / hyper victim, hyper predator. Forced, tricked, hurt, and persuaded to the uses of the family members' names individually grouped in together with the people next to the schools, because there are recorded uses of this relevant. That's why and how, too, they have whole wire crime methods. And it's relevant to where and how they're hiding behind how there are uses simultaneously, consciously, have been uses simultaneously, consciously, of how we didn't have a relationship with Korea, of how we had then established a relationship with Korea, positive, and how we are still positive with that relationship, still criminal insidious natures of positive, and that increasingly self-valued here and there, tactical ulterior from the hyper-native system, for example, while Russians are also involved here with this and there, and with all the countries individually grouped and together, those differences are being and having been employed specifically to keep styles of logic manifest, needing to blame other things, others, ourselves, like racism, and needing to pretend other per actually knowing. See, that's why it's necessary to understand too how they employed those differences, all physical differences, all metaphysical differences, all identity differences, to mean other than they do. Where and how this is a database is oriented since before computers method with conjunction to our instances roles. So there's a Celeste Wells, I don't know, who they used to plant evidences with overt criminal enterprises, private ones. So in other words, I'm speaking about the stuff with the school because these are names on off the World Trade Center. And every year leading up to that and since, they have rolls of wire crimes with Connecticut interbranch locations and with Wethersfield interbranch locations all along the roads and routes next to them. And those are also people that were used to film fake things and uses of people at corners of streets uses of their family members. There is a Trantola and Trantola who has roles with wire crimes and criminally foreign influence uses of on and off news media locations, and with their advertisements, with their uses of names like family. And as you know how they have like when the news brings up overt criminal enterprises, they have like music playing. Like, start playing. Do you think $6 for 10-inch submarine sandwich is a good deal? I don't know. Next to a subway in New Britain, I don't know if it was made up or real. In other words, reported there was a body dumping spots of a serial killer. But that serial killer is also recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed to having been involved with natures of identity theft, fraud, slanders instances with people who didn't go to schools I went to, but they were involved with abuses of boys and girls when they were little, in the form of identity theft, fraud, slanders, where and how the interbranch would use their roles with their roles. They have roles in natures of roles with Korea and with Russia along Route 3 and like on and off Elm Street and Rocky Hill. And Route 3 goes by the state judicial branch offices. That there's a first house that when you come off that Route 3 from the Putnam Bridge into Wethersfield, before you get to the right near the state judicial branch offices, there's an Oliveri house there, who are strangers who pretended to know me with a handful of instances as their roles planting evidences, with also complete strangers and people on between campuses that have roles with this, with other countries and military police, switching and forging and fabricating police reports, juxtaposed natures of abuses of kids and uses of that. Because when people have to speak about such syntactically, they are forced to pick one type of child abuse. They have sexual child abuses. They have natures of child abuses. They have digital ones. So they have males and females interbranch with the overt criminal enterprises, private ones simultaneously role self-valuing it relative to their uses at the campuses of their roles, told to hide their actual identities of uses and relationships with Korea, with Russia, with Saudi Arabia. So they've been planting with Hartford Hospital and other hospitals in Hartford are involved with the police forums and doctors who've been involved with identity theft frauds, also with their families, but also with judges and prosecutors attaching little kids and their families to fake locations relevant to the uses of these negative and simultaneously the positive aspects of where and how we are bound with other countries. Again, tactical terror from how we are, and simultaneous / hyper tactically, because there is uses of where and how differentially people are in certain ways simultaneously only wrongdoers and simultaneously roles furthering predicate acts method uses, wrongdoing uses that were engineered, self-valued by the breaching method that employed everyone blaming other things, others, ourselves for what it caused. That identity of colonization. And when we examine what was true, always about it not denying exceptions, and simultaneously with and as the value of exceptions, we are shown simultaneously how the hyper-simultaneous uses exception nature distinctly from, but exactly the same way that computers do. Computers use identity, exactly the way all things do, but increasingly, hyper additionally, reliant upon syntactical positive treatments, negative treatments, identity treatments that can't afford defenses of themselves, and the protraction of the short words and revelations that come from uses of that which is hyper evidential. For example, how Native Americans, Black Americans, and people A through Z were sickly, distinctly, syntactically, forced, tricked, and hurt, and persuaded to be both simultaneously manifest, syntactically, entertaining, and having entertained positive, negative treatments, identity treatments that couldn't be entertained, and us defended from what employed people grouping criminal enterprises wrong and valuing needs to hide that, valuing roles increasingly at all crime scenes with the breaching methods uses of them, at all criminal insidiousness natures of positive treatment scenes, criminal insidiousness natures of charities, only capable of being increasingly. The hyper native will demonstrate this to us. This is really what the Native American dreams. They want us to leverage that will we have as every person to counter the tactically denatured all identity ground locations, all suburbs, since before our founders were even born, let alone the cities. We have the means vertically and horizontally to open up space / existence means out of nowhere, like that, instantly. Everyone on the same page. Vaccines. Pantheism brings these things. It's a religion. In other words, how we can afford this. We don't have to wait for religious leaders. We'll show them how to have that led by. What's really going to cause positive value nature progression acts and natures everywhere at once. Boxings to campus dance with stolen name. So who will be my trainer? And to prove that they have, the integrity to do this, they have to be able to simultaneously counter that which led up to the World Trade Center attack in Manhattan. And in that context and sense, has roles with sequence shifts planting. There was a Sammy Vega. I'm sorry, I have to use your name, Sammy Vega, a former director of the FBI in his defendant capacities, and people that worked for Hartford courts in the Britain courts. They have roles with investigations and investigators that have been used, roles with uses of locations next to every place, and so therefore next to campuses, where and how exploited is the identity the sciences share, which is manifest when subject treatments are brought up like slavery. And like when and how they bring up, they say, oh, George Washington owned slaves, and no one defends him. A breaching method measures and maintains no one capable of defending him. No one capable of defending both political parties' presidents, but then pretending others simultaneously. Per the employments of criminal insidiousness of positive and negative treatments. For example, uses of the sciences abridged. Uses of them increasingly needing to self-value how they've been trained. Per this is abuses of them, of the stewards of it, and of the people that go to each campus individually grouped and together. Because all that is maintained effectively to maintain uses of and roles self-valuing. Uses of people filming things, people sitting next to each other, so they can make time treatments at interbranch locations and at other countries individually grouped and together. Inclusion with also people A through Z, overt criminal enterprises and private ones kept behind the exact same finite details, sequence shifts, criminal and serious natures of positive and negative treatments, time needed against people. This was an effectively maintained outcome /S. I taught best boxings. So New Britain has, and Hartford has rules with police forms. On-off Trinity College, people are involved with predicate acts that were simultaneously wrongdoing rules and uses of their nature there. Now, this makes people defend their these other persons making up conspiracy theories. They're preventing people from speaking about acts by attaching little kids and their family members to fake words with each others and with themselves. See, it was very simple to keep only 3 branches of government collusion with that which are the other natures of criminal enterprises. So various natures of federal criminals, for example, before we group them relative to methods of predicate acts roles, methods of wrongdoing roles. It is not to use, so to defend, no justifications of the law that are saying this person's a criminal, this one's not. Like, for example, the January 6th committee in defenses of itself, that's being used remotely, having been used remotely relative to this. Their narratives regarding Russians. They even have a guy with a family with a kid with now a guy. Nothing personal against him. They were nice person. I don't know. No, they have you walk by people and then they put fake to use sense and sensibilities of everyone, hypersense and sensibilities of everyone. Now, as systems tactical ulterior from our volumes system, humanity, where and how really we have the answers to what causes negative value nature, progressions, acts, nature. So those buildings in New York City are only capable, they were only capable of blaming other things, others and ourselves. Is identity of always collusion. What about if your collusion, Liam gets in a car accident? Dollars. I don't know. I don't know what you mean about the car accident. I know that there are investigators uses of the agency and of the courts spreading lies about people and leaving out what came before when people were reported to have done behavior. So that was involved with sequence shifts. You can't record police and courts and political families and overt criminal enterprises simultaneously, but one way, and private ones. They recorded themselves, for example. So there are neighbors of and uses of corners of the street, people associated with a former Mayor Gould, all along where Two Rod Highway runs into Hangdog Lane, and the Burl Turnpike at one end, and then Route 3 at the other end. And then there's a better than 90-degree right-hand turn someone has to take if they're going to go right, if they're going to go south on Route 3. So you have to speed up right after you take that turn. For example, there are police forms and families with the where they have the word family used too is relevant. We're dealing with overt criminal enterprises and with interbranch. And what are they going to say? Oh, but we're just doing it because of that. They have roles with other countries. So then you bring up the roles with other countries. They are styles of logic. They're here and there. The defenses of identities of jobs, like with psychology, they're delusions raw. They're criminally foreign influence roles. See, but you have to have forgiveness and stay on the predicate acts, what people are actually saying, because those locations are roles with the interbranch, and their patients and criminals are kept needing to hide the same sequence shifts, finite active progressive roles, also for their families, and how this is the maintained outcome is kept, is actually recorded. But it shows also there was also a pattern of them replacing that which is actually recorded with fake things, and they're hiding behind how we have countries of a whole bunch of different nations on off the campuses. So we have the sense and sensibilities of them pretending they need integrity and should pretend to be integrity for reasons other than that they should be pretending and needing to be integrity. So, for example, a former director of the FBI, Robert Luskin, and some courts, families and judges and other branches of government individually grouped in together in different ways, have roles switching names, forging names, planting evidences at locations, where and how they are being and having been used as victim predators, as roles with remote uses of all identity ground locations, areas and states, where and how it employed. Everyone blaming other things other than themselves and using real means to the real demonstrations of it. In other words, real truths. The breaching method forced even everyone sickly distinctly victims, even Native Americans against Native Americans, to be racist against each other. Because now they're using systems tactical ulterior from the one our human species volume is syntactically actually manifest as. Syntactically actually the complete possession of. See, this new, once it had countries sustained defenses of themselves, uses of names, grounds voicings, tactical ulterior, the sciences identities, individually grouped in together, tactical ulterior from how the hyper simultaneously has them manifest, increasing value to us actually. So this is the identity of relativity theorem. I'm a good driver. All exception nature in the past demonstration of the same thing. In other words, I did do stupid things a couple times when I was a kid though, with a car. So there are some courts, judges, and prosecutors who've been fabricating things with that and making things up about that, and they made things that weren't what they were because of their roles with uses of crime scenes, all locations, and then uses of that remotely where and how they have uses of corners of streets. So the people involved with Russia, with all these countries that have nothing to do with each other, one thing they have together, as they all individually grouped in together, have uses of like interstates, intercities. More and more intercities, they have to hide live progressions from more interstates, and so, some ways, and simultaneously intercities, some ways. They're kept criminally foreign influence needs to keep hurting and making and simultaneously helping whoever becomes a leader to make them entertain criminal and seditious natures of positive treatments, negative treatments, and identity treatments. Per this method that has manifest all kinds of identities, formally, informally, and that insidiousness with people A through Z, leveraged against everyone's voice. How they effectively have been attaching people that don't even know each other, and all exceptions, effectively, where no one's going to be honest about those exceptions, or they attach us to fake words and fake locations relevant to this. These are people that from See, in first grade, these are people from off campuses. These are names that most people wouldn't be able to get, like former director of the FBI, Robert Luskin, and in his defendant capacities, leading up to it and since, recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confessed non-verbally in the 2006 district court case. Also verbally through Thaddeus Grabowski and his verbal and nonverbal demonstrations of roles with two Mendez police, also involved with abuses of little boys and girls, since there were roles with men and women involved with abuses of little boys and girls, and identity thefts, fraud, slanders, intercampuses, as some of the police with Wethersfield and Hartford and intercities involved, and the police forms involved with regular departments, and uses of their names syntactically. Like, for example, and then if you use as an example something like Uvalde in the news, that whole thing could have been made up. Witch trials could have been made up, but there is an extent that that was used criminally anyway, and is used increasingly criminally anyway, where they're speaking for George Washington and or Marbury versus Madison, differentially, sickly, distinctly, to that self-value, because that's having been used remotely. George Washington wanted to tell no lie, but everyone was forced to lie and to entertain roles with and uses of identity, ground locations as slaves, as fact-cheating nature slaves. They wanted that told. They wanted demonstrated those who would, how they were being used remotely, pretending not to understand this, pretending they couldn't fathom such, simultaneously pretending they're being honest about why and how discernible emotions are manifest. Emotions are about the simultaneous. Otherwise, they're about the dysfunction. See how we are separated and have been separated from from that, how we are supposed to function as humanity, as this volume is really being demonstrated to, about what's going to cause positive or negative value nature progression. Our founders left us to demonstrate how we had to entertain and try to gain wealth, to sneak, to let the rest, to get out of the rest of the slavery rulers of everyone, including themselves, to counter it without letting them know it was them. All exception, nature, or in demonstration of the same thing. So they had to counter extort the rest of the founders of America. So there were recorded conscious, criminally foreign influence uses of locations next to the campuses between time that were not just for legitimate, what they have doing, pretending to perceive legitimately about the behavior of kids on and off campuses. They've been sticking fake things into records. They've been hiding what came before that. They've been hiding confessions tied to it. So those people are also involved with remote uses of locations next to the state capitol involved with identity theft, fraud, slanders. Relevant per this is that's one of the things non-distinctly against every single person this breaching method was and is. And it is increasingly valued distinctly how it was. And it is increasingly valued distinctly how it is. And relevant to how the identity of relativity is actually manifest this way, actually discernible. So the theory of relativity and the identity of relativity theorem show remote uses of all positive and negative treatments at all formal and informal locations, also being and having been needing to hide that or hurt her trying to counter it, relevant to all things, just as colonization is. See, the method of colonization is greater than and was more finite than it. But colonization was used by itself and by everyone else distinctly to measure and maintain. Everyone needed for different motivations needed to deny all the revelations from where and how colonization is one of the things that really caused and causes negative value nature progressions, acts, and natures. It's a negative value nature progression, a negative value nature, a nature as criminal insidiousness nature, who blames George Washington for slavery. That's like blaming. I never read about Uncle Tom. I'm coming to this because the Harriet Beecher Stowe house and the Mark Twain house, right next to each other, in Hartford. They were recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed, also involved, having been used to plant evidences, sequence shifts, natures of identity thefts and frauds and slanders that had been coordinated on and off campuses. This also uses the identities of the scientists, stewards at locations, including coaches of teams. And it uses where and how people are going to speak in context, whether they're going to leave details out of conversations. And it uses methods to make sure it unlocks people roles with that. For this method that, I went to Highcrest School, for example, from first grade to sixth grade. I had been to other campuses before that. I started school younger. One campus I went to for 1 year and has roles. With a kid, they had me have a couple instances with, and that was it, of communications with them. And it wasn't bad at all, but it was used for evil. Relative to this identity theft, fraud, slander method, also per uses of him by the families of the houses and roads and routes next to the campus, which closed the year after I went to it for 1 year. And so these are people that consciously have been using, knowing where each person is going to be, knowingly where a breaching method exploited our value progression, uses of these roads as they are constructed, uses of the corners with this, pseudo corners of streets used. So the intercities, they have Demoro families and Scalora families are also recorded involved with the intelligence communities and the police form, state police, former director of the FBI, Wethersfield police. They have, with military police too, they have wire crimes and falsified police reports roles together, uses of them, stacking fake things in databases, inter-branch, private databases, verbally multi-front. This is also where and how investigators have been used remotely. They've been keeping their patients and criminals, including the worst ones, and against innocent people. They've been keeping them forced, tricked, hurt, persuaded to hide the same sequence, yet find act progressive lies and roles and uses of them and of their neighbors, and as their roles were uses of corners of streets. So there's been corruption on off the state judicial branch offices and on off the state prison offices that has been using how there are victims / hyper victims that won't let us demonstrate this because they're directed. See, it's some ways their faults individually, grouped and together. Some ways it's the hierarchy's faults, like former director of the FBI, involved with the overt / insidious evidence reception crime methods, federal rules of evidence crime methods, not just acts rules. For example, these manifest so overtly / insidiously simultaneously with New York City's infrastructure and reactions to it syntactically and defenses of that, where they make names treatments and passions and emotions treatments regarding science, regarding what the causes of such are about, even when correctly, if if everyone's enslaved and one person's job is better, Uncle Tom used the phrase of see, those are forced to make people defend victim reactions, and then simultaneously criminally foreign influence, premises treatments, fact treatment, nature, qualities, aspects, sequence treatment, value treatment, simultaneous value treatments. See, we know the simultaneous values, the order of the finite is prevented free speech. We are prevented that quality of fact treatment nature that we all want to use. We're overtly / insidiously the people of New York City and across the globe. I'm not forgetting this is the species volume in a trap. The suburbs, before our founders were even born, were designed to cause negative value nature progressions, acts of nature. And against the people that were to counter it too. Every counter, everything is employed to keep itself screened. Now, to observe this, we have to observe how and why the increasing value of the values like colonization with answers have been denied their conjunctions to proper correlation treatments. Like, for example, regarding the value of how to care for phrases like Native American or Black American. One cannot make proper treatments by that without addressing how criminal insidiousness natures of positive treatments and of negative treatments were simultaneously, consciously identity treatments, and simultaneously forced, tricked, hurt, persuaded to blame other things, others, or selves for the causes of that, or they'd be sensed and hurt. And see, that was a database relationship, and is a database relationship, and it is to identities of corruption that are individually grouped and together bound. And that is exploited. But before and through that, it was also by worse, which is also relevant to and as consciously. Uses of campuses and ages and natures of them have nothing to do with each other. And private and overt criminal enterprises and worse. And opinions A through Z, screening it, changing people's words rather than following mandated law. So the real answers shall use what is actually hyper-evidential, where and how immunities from prosecutions have been employed by the breaching method to maintain uses of words like criminals simultaneously, collusion /S, with all identity ground locations uses to hide such afterwards too, including uses of prisons, including uses of how they are and have been actually syntactically manifest, because they have roles with child offenders and murderers and people on off the body dumping spots since before they were caught, recorded how kept needing to hide the same finite act of progressive lies with them. So there were a whole bunch of people with Whiting Forensics Place in Connecticut that worked there and their family members, like including doctors and judges in courts and people that work for them and their family members that are also on and off the state judicial branches, on and off the state prison offices. In other words, off it with the locations next to it in other ways. Use of corners near them. Use of how they're near town lines. distinctly. And so, what? In other words, I don't know the Oliveris. They all kind of ways they were involved with criminally foreign influenced uses of my teachers, and them, you know, from with former director with FBI and police families juxtaposed, also hiding syntactically, where everyone's still dealing with police departments corruption, acting like it's only that police department. When it's actually recorded how effectively all identities of sophistication really are being and haven't been maintained. Even how the interstates, the distinct state polices, have collusions with the names. So I don't know. Eric Jensen's also recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed he has been influenced to make fake exceptions, pretending to know me. And then when there were one or two exceptions they used that criminally foreign influence too. As people involved also with a Mike Pandoff. And they made confessions about girls tied to themselves who are also involved with the judges and prosecutors' families, who are also as names involved with overt criminal enterprises, with timed crimes with them, and with private places, with timed crimes with them on off campuses, and including per their roles with uses of corners of buildings and of inside the buildings too, consciously, for evidence is planting where and how remotely we are being used, cases that go before criminal courts to maintain criminally foreign influence uses of all locations, and nature demonstrating that to maintain that self-value, blamed on other things, others, ourselves, rather than what is actually being demonstrated. So they have wire crime acts and methods that the FBI also has roles with criminally foreign influence uses of the words, therefore of the sense and sensibilities of attorneys generals. They changed what Attorney General Barr said. He said what they were saying was bullshit. But they were adding additional and saying wrong what the president told them to say. And this is where both sides were and are wrong, and worse, because of what I caught only capable of being entertained, forced to be entertained by any leader that rolls with at all locations, areas, and states. So forgiveness, they should, it's for the people who pretended, because they were only capable of it, that they had the means to speak for who should have forgiveness, who should not, and what really went down at locations. What really is a value of instances? Who really knows each other and how? And how was that really used? So there's a guy, I believe his name is Chris Hansen, for example, who they had television shows where he's trying to counter negative value nature progressions, acts, natures with child offenders. And then he's going to defend that after. Oh, but I didn't cause all these things. And he's using little girls. But see, those little girls that are involved with that thing and the little boys that they have, for known reasons, lying about emotions and passions with the presentation of themselves to others. It was also timed, also use of a location where people have nothing to do with that, apparently. People are not even at those locations, where they call up the network to report something accurate with worse child abuses than the things they're putting people away for. The agencies and the intelligence community would deny it. They've been hiding exculpatory evidences, and they've been making up inculpatory evidences, and they've been hyper additional to collusions with the actual perpetrators at crime scenes, and with the breaching method there too. So we have men and women from other countries like Korea and like Russia and the territory of Puerto Rico. We have overt criminal enterprises, people from Italy involved with medical families with probate. With I don't know whether America's got probate courts and other natures of all the natures of courts have roles with psychology, with drugs and medicines crimes, also as police forms and intelligence community to counter such inclusions with it because they're attaching little kids and their family members to fake words with themselves and with others since they were kids. There's only 3 branches of government maintain complete possession of them. That's why they measured and maintained, blaming other things, others themselves, for any appearances of having to do with slavery that George Washington had. It was as a slave, role forced. He was worse than extorted and having to counter extort as the only means presented our founders to do. And the only reason they were able to do that too is because the Native Americans were masters of understanding. There's a breaching method against everyone, even against themselves, through themselves, through ourselves, as the species volume. How hyper additionally through ourselves as distinctly to keep how that functions from being discerned. English was revealed to teach this. The exceptions and exception nature of other languages and other identities of relationships their letters have. These as manifest as those identities of sounds. This is hyper additional to and as are better than living. Identity of forever nature. Where it is the possession of that since before matter that generates it as that which is most probably and practically and demonstrably actually being and having been demonstrated to us as nature, as an extent of it, distinctly from itself, from its complete self. But its complete identity of relationship to itself and the value of that only increasing is inseparable from all parts of itself, therefore from ourselves, even from the smallest finite part of ourselves. It is a possession on both sides of it, per science, demonstrably. This is what one of the things the A, W, is on the left side of the A is on the left side of Jesus Christ's head when we're looking at it when we're looking at him from our position, our perspective, and W is on the right side, and English is read right to left, left to right. But this is also being about how there is one identity of hyper origin that is distinctly that. But is also distinctly, non-distinctly, and simultaneously the only increasing value of the origin relative to the XY axis, relevant as means to the discernment of identities of relativity to positive and negative, therefore of identity's relationship to itself, This is also the volume theorem. We don't need a theory of volume. This is volume science. This is the science of pantheism, Hyper-additionalism is about the invisible but still discernible, so it can't be about itself without pantheism being hyper-additional to and as its value simultaneously, and everything trying to be led by what is actually hyper-simultaneously manifest. Where it's being led by its identity of relationship to itself and how we could discern it, actually. So they have the narratives directing the FBI and other agencies to react to real impositions upon the names at the schools in the furtherance of they're doing it against the parents too, differentially. In other words, they have employed people that make descriptions of how people describe crime scenes, and they have people, men and women of the FBI. I saw this somewhere on YouTube before, for example, proofs of it, but there are other proofs of it. When you hold what is simultaneously actually being and having been recorded, actually the substance of that claim, when passions and emotions are claimed legitimate, because that's relevant to where and to how the people of those apartment buildings in the Little Rap Guy and Friends cartoon, they're extorted, they're counter extorted, but they're being counter extorted with people throughout the whole entire species volume system, cartoon value nature system. For example, to show what our founders were trying to do, to show what other founders were trying to do. They knew that people would take them. What they made positive and negative treatments, people would use them as criminal insidious natures and positive and negative treatments. People would use them to say or do whatever to get every individual from not to use those revelations that come from where and how the finite details are denied, while people are pretending passions and emotions. So we're gonna come to volume science, greater than and more finite than where and how computers use volumes as as an identity of volume, each computer. And then we're gonna come to how, where, and how exactly the same way. See, so we have to understand the one that's always, because it is temporary, 5 distinctly bound identities of sequence / simultaneous nature, and where and how it is as a sequence nature, and where and how it is as a simultaneous nature, and where and how it is as a slash, is where and how we are 3 volumes, as it is one identity of relationship to itself, for how it makes more of itself through hypergenesis. This is also the part of the Old Testament that we were supposed to write about and to measure and to maintain. Who was going to be lying about, pretending to care for and or against preservation of the Old Testament, including the stewards of it. The messengers of modern religions knew that all locations, areas, and states had already been used criminally for an influence. They already had criminally re-engineered the method and nature of the sciences, which could only be discerned through its nature's nature, and the only increasing value of that simultaneously per uses of the extent of it we have to discern. So each must learn. So We have roles with other countries that were involved with the World Trade Center attack, and where and how countries react and or not react, they or don't react to things, where and how they've been used as distinct identities to disguise what stays fluent and stayed fluent through our countries. And one of the ways it knew that it could do this is by keeping everyone not realizing how they'd be roles needing to plant illusions at all locations, including fact treatment nature ones, predicate acts rules with facts treatments, predicate acts rules just standing there when someone's standing near you, per criminally foreign influence uses of that involved, and per its relevance to where and how employed were those overt slash insidious examples increasingly demonstrated to our perception, like where and how in that context, as this volume science is actually means to observe it, where and how sickly distinctly Native Americans, sickly distinctly Black Americans, and sickly distinctly every other self-indifference simultaneously, increasingly by the same breaching method, employed that to meanings and to uses of those meanings and identities of value progressions reliant upon those meanings. It had nothing to do with that. So when we could discern it, when nature would be and is demonstrating it, we'd have to show how it is just demonstrable through remote uses of our own people around ourselves. Uses of the people, we have to use the people, the names of people we don't want to use publicly, especially where and how there are a bunch of liars that force you to use other people's names and the people around you because they already locked themselves into roles attaching little kids and their family members of each age to fake words, uses of it on campuses that were collusions off campuses with this. So there's a form. So there are teachers. Then when you bring them up other people's names, they change what you say and said. They're not allowing acts to be demonstrated. For example, uses of Samuel Vega through other people, including former director of the FBI and various natures of courts, leaderships, have been colluded off campuses, off their locations, and then further and further on their campuses and on their locations, including interbranch and with other. They've been doing this intercities with Connecticut through time, and worse than interstates. So they've been uses of the interstates and intercities also differentially needed to hide lie progressions at the same time for other motivations, natures, needs, interests. This is complete possession. This is complete possession over the disorder, only known everywhere disorder was and is. For this breaching method that is databases oriented, but it had nothing to do with those databases. It had nothing to do with the conjunctions to those databases as criminally foreign influence uses of them. And but through how it kept all that and the differences, types of motivations, natures, needs, interests, sick to collusions at other locations. Where and how we have names uses, people using each other's names, where they have this game with the little kids, between the little kids. They're dishonestly measuring the intelligence of little kids and of adults as roles with a method that has been, conscious uses simultaneously, not just of our roles with other countries, but conscious uses of how we didn't have relations with Korea, how we had relations with Korea, and how we have relationships with them now. Still, criminalization natures of positive, negative treatments and of identity treatments then and now that are incapable of defending themselves and of countering here or there what is fluent through our countries and uses of them here and there, pretending they have an identity that could speak, thinking they have an identity at the same time, really believing it. They have an identity that could speak for their volume. Humanity's volume science, you see yin yang, could never part as the human volume science can. While how we are parted, male and female, ages. This is a demonstration of how it is. We are hyper additional. We are one in we're in how we are plural identities of the one species volume, singular. Those are exceptions, exception nature, and demonstration of how one identity of volume is generating itself with volumes that are incompatible, but when positive to itself. Then each distinct part of your body, when it is positive to itself, it is positive to your complete identity. But see, now this is through other systems where positive and negative treatments have been applied to other insidious natures of themselves. So we can't afford this science that uses where and how, where a volume that is inseparable from itself, but simultaneously it won't mix with itself, but one way. Everything is in, so it's using exception nature distinctly from anyone or anything that could be invented, distinctly from how computers use exceptions, but then exactly how computers use exceptions, relevant to identity, relevant as that uses of all memory locations, all the types of memory. The value of time is increasing. The value of sequence relationships increases. The reality of the value of what is actually simultaneously recorded increases. The value of what came true before that at all locations increases before that though. And then distinctly, in other words, that's being missed because they employed, each age of fact treatment nature, uses of other people's names, others or so, uses of phenomena where the sciences are divided meant to measure and maintain needs to prevent that which nature is actually demonstrating to us. Nature's nature and the only increasing value of that being needed to be used to speak for nature. So I've been asking for a response because they have wire crime acts and methods with other police forms. Like there is a Joshua Julian who was recorded involved with forensics locations, also with digital crimes and crime methods that also have roles with uses of recorded conscious uses of distinct natures of child abuse's roles. That also the only natures of stewards to counter the distinct types of child abuses are in collusion with, for where and how maintained distinctly. Each person A through Z, including each identity of the branches of the government has an identity. How they are kept criminally foreign influence and capable of having realized what their individuals and what grouped in together they actually communicate to ourselves. As they do when they blame George Washington for slavery. All exceptions, exception nature, appearing to have them demonstrate doing such correctly, are in demonstration of the same thing too, which is simultaneously increasing in demonstration too of how nature uses nature as it is actually manifest. how it uses exception nature in ways that no one could invent. So, and so in ways that can be used to answer all our questions about really how properly and better than perfect to cause positive value, nature, progressions, action, natures, and better than perfect, how properly to really cause, to really, how properly to counter the real causes of negative value, nature, progressions, action, natures, individually grouped and together, grouped like criminal enterprises, criminal insidiousnesses, criminal insidiousness natures like criminal enterprises themselves, including private ones juxtaposed, interbranch juxtaposed, that insidiousness of people's opinions, convictions inherent to their fact nature qualities and aspects when they claim things are politics. Well, that was caused by politics. People offensively pretending to care for and pretending people's right to vote means what it doesn't, because as a means to used remotely by the breaching method, where and how it employed fact human nature, blaming other things, others, ourselves for what it caused, or it would sense who was trying to do that, and it would hurt them. That's what those crazy laws were about. So they're people pretending in passions and emotions against things like prejudice and racism as means to screen and to prevent reliefs to those people most hurt by that breaching method that employed all identity ground locations tactically denatured, let alone those most overtly / insidiously simultaneously tactically denatured. So then they had all these fights. The people extorted and counter extorted in the Little Rap Guy and Friends cartoons, where Little Rap Guy and Friends and everyone else of the cartoon value nature system, now they're being forced to cultivate their own extortions and counter extortions simultaneously. But it's by the anti-hyper archetypal criminal enterprise that is trying to force, check, hurt, counter force, counter hurt, counter persuade properly the entire species volume, the entire cartoon value nature system members to tell American history, to tell their histories, not leaving out phrases like criminal insidiousness, like criminally foreign influenced. If you're a modern country and you tell your history without using phrases like criminal insidiousness and without using phrases like criminally foreign influenced, you're told and you are telling your history wrong. This breaching method knew that they would have to, if use those phrases wrong too. In other words, they knew that they would have collusions with the same criminal enterprises that they've been charging and grouping wrong. Because their roles with the identity theft, fraud, slanders instances, their roles timed with uses of corners of streets, including remote uses of the witness protection program, involved with the former director, a whole bunch of people on off Trinity College and CCSU, involved with child campuses and campuses next to them, out off medical campuses, fire campuses, military locations next to Connecticut news locations like WFSB, Fox Connecticut News, WTNH, fabricating emails with the intelligence community, with child sex offenders, with people with little kids used to counter things like child sex offenders in the furtherance of roles with natures of that. Also has roles with conscious uses of juxtaposed distinct natures of abuses of little kids and of elderly homes. Applied as roles with worse things at locations appearing to be for other motivations, natures, needs, interests. So they have my past neighbors too, with the same house recorded used as victims per Dillon family and per people on off Trinity College and CCSU involved with predicate acts, with the former director in various natures of courts, even judges and their family members, and prosecutors and their family members, and state's attorneys, therefore their family members, everyone where everyone lives. They've been planting fake things and hiding it using uses of, everyone's had roles with that force, or they attach everyone to fake words, as they did with WTNH, fabricating emails to hide communications that had been over the phone and over an answering machine, with confessions from a since proven child abuser principal and serial killer, and people associated with the body dumping spot of Billy Grasso, also on off the state judicial branch offices, and all along Route 3 in conjunctions to it, having been roles, also with spots next to the state capitol, with planting evidences, identity theft, fraud, slanders instances, acting so people can pretend things and pretend to perceive things, also at interbranch locations. Also, per other juxtaposed in their pretended motivations. So we've had complete possession over all investigations, investigators, and their campuses since before they were born. Vaccine is torn, belongs to tell. So they won't let us speak, and they're pretending for passions, emotions, other. So before I write a map, remember that they attach me and everyone around me and others to fake words with each other and fake words with others. They recorded themselves offensively, playing the sense and sensibilities of everyone, including the interbranch. For what it actually, in other words, you're going to see the Town Line Drive, the corners of Town Line Drive and South Stein Highway, in the corner of Wells Road and South Stein Highway was used for. How they forced. I don't know Charlie Bowes and his sister. His sister tried to pretend other. Charlie Bowes walked by me. I never had a communication conversation with my life at one of the places, one of the buildings next to the state capitol, and the buildings next to it, and like Fox Connecticut News, the buildings next to that too, are involved with them with identity thefts and frauds, with investigations and investigators, maybe as them too, and their families. Also has roles with private lawyers like a Trantola and Trantola note with uses of words like families, word slash value, slash identities. No. So this is Trantola, and Trantola was also all along Route 3 involved with identity theft, fraud, slanders, including with child offenders and people on off body dumping spots, and involved with recorded remote uses of the witness protection program, involved also with Weathersfield Interbranch at the corner of Fair Lane and Carriage Hill, involved with identity theft, fraud, slanders, people I don't know, but pretending other intercities tied to that location in the Weathersfield post office. That Chris Walters is another stranger who also made all kinds of confessions tied to this, and was used to pretend other by making exceptions they couldn't be honest about, with people from Central Connecticut State University involved with criminally foreign influence, uses of kids from other schools, with inclusion with kids from my grammar school that exploited other kids that they don't even know, and themselves wearing how their families too have been used for this identity theft, fraud, slander method, and little tricks they use that everyone misses. Like, for example, Ray Hernandez was cast a magic trick illusion where judges and prosecutors and other people recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed right before him that they've been using Sammy Vega and his family and their roles with DCF at the time, the Department of Children and Families, and the investigations of them, and the investigators and their family members and their intimate ties. including people that are involved with the running of prisons, that were used as victim predators. Because if you try to ask them to be honest, they'll be predators. So then they use their roles with the prison systems and with database racketeering that is also conjunctive to people just speaking things. Because then when they investigate that, they have illusions in the databases spoken and as uses of the sense and sensibilities of people. There was also a little black girl that was influenced to come and sit right next to me when I went to watch a movie at the movie theater on the campus of Trinity College. And it was conjunctive to stuff that might have been, in other words, they used Ray Hernandez to ask me about Sammy Vega. Then Sammy Vega came out the door at Central Connecticut State University. Now, this is also people associated with a Pruzzi family who's involved with the intelligence community, with overt criminal enterprises, plural, and with other countries. Also with teachers I didn't even have, with uses of stacking fake things and arranging things that people can't go back and be honest about, and people won't have time to, etc. This is a little method that employed the pseudo integrity of identities on and off the campuses of each age and nature, individually grouped and together, how grouped formally, employed all that criminally foreign influence, and everyone rolls with uses of that. So all you have to do is follow mandated law. Weathersfield Interbranch has roles, intercities with various natures of courts through time, have been fabricating audio and video as people on and off the World Trade Center leading up to it and since. So I started using Mike Pence's name first. I said they should fear Mike Pence. Then people start using words and phrases. I hear them in the media through the networks that attach me to fake words with the agencies, with the military. Hartford Hospital has roles with the intelligence community, with criminally foreign influence uses of the identities of Saudi Arabia, the identities of Russia, the identities of America, the identities of Korea simultaneously relevant to where and how they have roles with predicate acts and that were simultaneously wrongdoing too, where and how the identity of relativity as the identity of the simultaneously actually recorded, for example, again, is actually manifest. So then they learned, the people of those buildings in New York City and Little Rap Guy and friends, they learned that their extortions individually grouped and together. They also involved the extortions with people from other parts of New England and of America and of the world. Then they started understanding, being shown, the whole time everyone's trying to counter the original extortion of everyone. It's worse than extortion when we're speaking about slavery. We're going to counter slavery by focusing on the extortion part of it, because it's easier when they deny the significance of it, when they deny the significance of the increasing value of how Native Americans sickly distinctly were victims and are victims of the breaching method. Black Americans sickly were and are sickly distinctly victims of the breaching method against everyone. Every other difference. How many cultures there are? They call white, and not one of them defended the species volume, short words, and revelations. Clear. So we all gain native, pure, prepare. That's what we do. That's what the hyper-archetypal criminal enterprise, anti-hyper-archetypal criminal enterprise as criminal, as Little Rap Gang friends. That's what they're doing. This is also the perfect movie to make it realistic. How how they have movies with the whole world. They try to make them come together by having them attacked by some kind of thing, whatever. We make it an archetypal, anti-hyper archetypal criminal enterprise, still criminal enterprise though. That began by trying to be an anti-archetypal criminal enterprise. But the knowledge of how to do that was taken over. Because in other words, for example, there are means to show that and how each identity of formal locations, voices, individually grouped in together, they can't defend themselves. Fact treatment nature wise, identity treatment wise. And us from what exploits, and or themselves simultaneously from what exploits that. Differentially, but differentially, especially critically. We're how the value of what is hyper variable is increasingly being coupled with the value of its complete identity of relationship to itself, with its actual identity of relationship to itself only increasing, and the value of that only increasing. For how it is generating more of its identity of complete possession over all parts of space / existence, at least to the extent we are given to discern. To each please learn. Vaccines. I teach you long of what it brings. See, the science is sharing identity. And it is about the one way to fight, for example, that even if who loses wins, real evolution science, real positive value nature progression acts means out of nowhere. Evolution's fruits, gifts, means vaccines. Okay, I forgot. Thank you. Have a great day. If anybody's still here, thank you. Always here still. Thank you. See, Ron Adams had asked, is identity theft always collusion? Yes, because identity thefts and distinct natures and motivations for them, they are being and having been employed. Because the relativity of the motivations regarding every subject treatment, name treatment, location treatment, to the breaching method, for example, colonization was. For example, that the early states were left entrenched with its entrenched method of causing positive value nature progressions, only if they're going to be criminally foreign influenced ones, or counters with it that would have to hide roles countering it. So there was a means to sense and discern and to maintain from abroad through other bodies from abroad, other countries as archetypal criminal enterprises, other transnational criminal enterprises, other interstates ones, intercities ones too, that are maintained simultaneously in collusion with the interstates ones, and way worse, they're complete remote possession. So there's a campus I went to for 1 year, and there are more than 3, or at least 3 families next to it, recorded, confessed them, that were consciously. There's a 4th family that was unconsciously. And he's unconsciously. I don't know if they were consciously at all too in the background, because when they brought digital into it. See the branches of government individually grouped together have digital crimes and digital crime roles with all kinds of natures of organized crime, all kinds of natures of bad things, same things that go before courts, same things that are grouped with studies with their subjects treatment. In other words, we have a means to answer what redeems, and it's native pure slash hypernative pure. Now, fake branches bow and fall, and there is found the seed. Hear ye, as wall of species body, strength be found. The finite not ignore or gather round. So we gather as we would have and could have, as these ye, as the suburbs, with the peoples in those buildings, breach on breach. So one must teach how, really, why functional are we have needs by emotions, passions. They're about the simultaneous. If you try to speak for them about anything else, you pretend other. In other words, if you're pretending you're being honest about passions and emotions, and you're leaving out the smallest finite detail that shows that what you're convicting or opining not true always. See, there's a difference between something that is true always, not denying exceptions, and something that is just true or just factual. See, they've been using facts as lies and truths as lies so long per what was sustained that they've been using fact human nature crime methods, only capable of being all formal, informal, people A through Z collusions. So you'll see when the cartoon value nature systems members use truths that are true always, not denying any exceptions, and they ask to have legal representations of themselves to counter uses of it, how it won't be afforded, how they force, trick, hurt, persuaded, only treatments of the law that blame someone or something, rather than allowing actual acts honestly and properly treated, letting people actually, their actual words be used. See, all exception nature they've been getting away with because the sequence shifts. For the relevance of how they've been spreading lies about the kids through kids in other classrooms, it's all exceptions too at the same time. If the one they sense they're going to use what's actually recorded, use that value, the increasing value of how sickly distinctly everyone was the victim of colonization, for example, to hide how sickly non-distinctly, because that's what's increasingly being and having been demonstrated. But that simultaneously demonstrates how through our own. So they pretend that we're making we're saying things about them that we're not. They started this conversation. Make sure they get on paper, Connecticut into branch. Make sure they say sorry to Judge Napolitano, the people that pretended honestly to evaluate things I said on his Facebook page, because that's also involved with the names, involved with the agencies you recorded criminally foreign influence uses of the locations of the news agencies. Chris Walters, one of pretended to know me, various made exceptions, with also complete strangers though, but with people he said confessed that Spada families involved with him with names. Some other guys, I don't know. They walked by me at a Spada house one time. They made fake exceptions to know me with their roles with uses of the corner of Knott Street and Walcott Hill. And I don't know their names. See, they play these games and then they put fake things. You can't counter it. And they've been building upon it. And Sandra Spada confirmed this through roles with Fred Grisey. I never saw Fred Grisey and Chris Walters at the same time, place at the same time. I barely know Fred Grisey. He's recorded, confessed, demonstrated, recorded, confirmed law, involved with predicate acts with Walters family and with people on and off Central Connecticut State University, involved with crimes at at kids' campuses, and people on and off Trinity College, involved with crimes also with them on and off the state judicial branch offices, on and off the state prison offices, also abuses of little kids from the north end of Hartford, and then further uses of it where now they have roles with the military, overtly slash insidiously, criminally foreign influence too, as roles with the exception nature, switching and forging names. There are as roles with motivations they understand, but only to an extent they can't be honest about. And that's relevant because these are the people intercities who also colluded interstates on off the World Trade Center, also as people recorded how since they were kids, kept with other countries and with overt criminal enterprise, timed criminally foreign influence uses of corners of streets, and of natures of identity thefts and frauds, filming fake things so they could use remotely courts and police forms and political families using time criminally foreign influence, time treatments, uses of immunities from prosecutions, uses of the knowledge of states' secrets, criminally foreign influence. So please respond. There's a Leahy family that also Rick Sam Faglione recorded, confessed, demonstrated, confirmed. A whole bunch of people on off the locations of CCSU, like the location next to it on Covington Street, involved with police forms families and with the training of police forms that are undercover police forms that have been involved planting evidences, identity theft, fraud, slanders, wire crimes, planting so they could go before courts that lock people pretending passions and emotions with them. Now that is also recorded, confessed, people tied to them, confirmed that it's connected and demonstrated it connected to uses of the corner of Route 3 and Elm Street in Rocky Hill, as people involved on off the state judicial branch offices through time, recording between campuses, vertically and horizontally connected predicate acts and wrongdoing roles, also relevant to where and how. Those motivations are differentially relevant to the identity of relativity as it is actually manifest. See, they have the sciences offensively with theories, and then they pretend people they pretend they have conversations with people. The mental health community involved with the courts and police forms and as police forms and courts, families and things like that. The delusions wrought, criminally foreign influence, fact, human nature, qualities, aspects, and nature since founding relevant to the answers. Because we're going to answer the questions, not just in the cartoon value nature system. Are people extorted and counter-extorted as they actually are anyway? The people of New York City, across the globe, in suburbs, let alone in the cities. The suburbs were designed before our founders were even born, with slavery entrenched north and south, sickly distinctly. That's one of the things that you say when someone says George Washington owned slaves. When someone says, the founders owned slaves. Then you deal with the exception nature that appeared to be a demonstration of other. Some cases they're a demonstration of it, right, but not through the George Washington treatments. George Washington could tell no lies when represented by the Constitution unabridged. Here does not pretend to be integrity that what it is not yet. For the breaching method, real justice, quote, real justice must satisfy all appearances of real justice. Doesn't mean fake it until you make it. Break! Then there is seed that grows. Here, wow. I'll gather around. Vaccines. So we have a whole sport too to prepare because the pantheist games comes with pantheism. boxing, martial arts, and wrestling share its identity for this. To defend us, we're in how the overt criminal enterprise is private and the interbranch. We're our inclusion, also with the exception nature tied to them, and people A through Z, pretending other. And how? Fake branches bow and fall. Here, wall. They want me to speak like that. The people of New York City who disbelieves. There are many who do. Now let's get them there. I'll show you how to use passion emotions honestly. Because they have little fakes with the interbranch and their kids. So man up, get them on paper with the women too. Forging, switching roles, names with these games with the kids. Fair. Get the punk in the background pretending to be worried about cars because they have people involved with bad things with cars. And I made things that weren't dangerous at all with cars. For syntactically, maybe people would speak about such. And I didn't say I was really speeding or anything. I just said the street lines come slow. In a speech class, in a speech I gave in a speech, in one of the two speech classes, recorded, confessed, demonstrated, and confirmed involved with other also pretend to be involved with people from various campuses in the medical community, fabricating audio and video with federal crimes, with evidences, with lawyers, and we're tied to Mike Pandolf and neighbors of his involved on all sides of the schools with increasingly planting fake out. Nothing personal against Mike Pandolf. He'll tell you himself that he was forced, tricked, or persuaded to use my name criminally and to make arrays of sides, of fake sides and relationships between me and others I don't even know, where they paint arrays and they pretend others are lying and are not, but they're all the liars. So make sure, because these are people also involved with the corners on Wells Road, all the way to Central Connecticut State University and on off the various sides of the campus, distinctly, non-distinctly, and simultaneously, how criminally foreign influence uses of the Iwo Jima Memorial involved with this, and with the World Trade Center attack, per uses of Central Connecticut State University and other colleges and universities being used to plant fake evidences on campuses recorded 24/7 to stop that. But it comes right through anyway because of the relevance of where and how differential criminally foreign influence and differentially wrongdoing and differentially predicate acts roles is relevant to the predicate acts methods roles is relevant to the breaching methods and uses of the identity of relativity, the identity / identities, plural, of relativity, prevent the demonstration of criminally foreign influence uses and delusions wrought simultaneously of theories of relativity, of theories of volume, of the news locations, of the voicings of at such locations, pretending other, how motivated to it. They've been preventing mandated law at locations, criminally foreign influence uses of immunities from prosecutions relevant to where and how that is exploited originally and still. Vaccines, religion fail, betrayal tribes. Always make sure I get them on paper. We got them. Just respond. So Connecticut News also attached me to fake conversations with themselves and with other about the World Trade Center. Some of the other people they did that with also just walked up to me, made a statement, and then walked away. So, here, fake branches, fear. Or step down, because that's what you're obligated actually by your oaths, which obligate you to demonstrate how you were recorded a conscious anyway. You guys pretended to care about your oaths. You guys valued the parties the way you guys hurt each other because you're both sick, fake punks. So you're legal junks. So you left out with what really Obama and what really Trump, and leaving out really what is forcing Joe Biden not to be able to sustain the extent of the means they understand, means to and needs to yell about things. For example, Joe Biden's dream, part of Joe Biden's dream. He wants to yell, like a lot of people do, about why and how, there are a whole bunch of people who are worse than never having been. So we have to read each other's dreams, the Native Americans say. These presidents have the same dream, they're missing it. It's what they should observe how president / chief are three increasing volumes that are only compatible one way. And that compatible way is increasingly prevented use by the method that is native pure, use by where and how we are actually manifest. I taught best boxing, so get them on paper, because they switch names, forge names, use where and how people are going to walk as means to stack fake words, identity thefts, frauds of a method, motivations, natures, needs by everyone missed, but it's discernible. It's weird how they use you remotely, though, yourself. Ones in the background, they use my name with these news articles. So there are people on Ridge Road involved with the corners on Highcrest Street in Wethersfield, involved with some mothers and the families and generations of their family, involved with criminally foreign influence uses of my name, with some Delafair families, judges and spotters. Also, how as victim predators, the girls that had a whole bunch of other boyfriends at the same time, rules with abuses of them and of their brother, Joe Lombardo, what's his name? There is a Joe Lombardo, also one of the ones involved with the predicate acts on my street. I never saw him on my street in my life. It's people on and off the spots next to the campuses, involved on intercampuses, setting up predicate acts, identity theft, fraud, slanders, roles with uses of investigations and of investigators used remotely, criminally foreign influenced, as relevant to the answering of the questions in the people of the minds of the real people stacked upon locations, and of the real suburban locations, the real causes of negative value, nature, progressions, action, nature, sickly, distinctly here and there, shows what really to counter. And what really was blocking and is blocking are actually inherent active and progressive means instantly that we also can agree about instantly. So we're not going to come through the filter of abridged branches, private and individual opinions and convictions A through Z. So we're going to have my free speech defended. They've been attaching me and others to fake locations, fake words with each other because they use that as evidence, forcing people to speak as groups so they can't use finite details. You're gonna examine how they're gonna freak out when we use things that are true always, not exceptions, in demonstration of how there is no legal representation of the people of New York City and of all locations, let alone New York City. And simultaneously, we're going to observe means to employ them as a counter agency, simultaneously as a world agency that is we're going to work for our species identity of volume everywhere it is, not entertaining and pretending that any other country was not a victim of this and was not a victim having that victimhood being and having been, it was employed, blamed on other things others themselves. All means to counter such employed, to blame other things others themselves, when employed such needed, what uses such needed. Not just where and how it is manifest, not just where and how it is manifest, with conjunctions to what is manifest, individually grouped in together, but uses of that simultaneously, which shows uses of the grounds. It's not complicated. It's how computers work. So New York City, we're gonna have a ring you could set up to different sizes. with sensors. You put the sensors on boxing gloves, and we'll sense where the people's boxing things are. I don't know if they have hologram actually, or how you can know where the opponent is, but we could figure out how to program this, where and how. The ancient gaming system, not just the Republic, needs needs the campus and pantheism returned. It's a function by the science how correlation nature actually works. As millions, one way redeems, one way. Thank you. Vaccine.